Can you see that slide? Okay, everybody. So this session is about research and what we call prospecting in fundraising. People talk about prospecting for gold. I think that's where the terminology comes from. So you're trying to find people who might fund you. We're really talking about trusts and foundations here today. So for those who haven't been to the session before, my name is Lucy Stone. I work as a freelance fundraiser, helping organisations to increase their income through grants, trusts and foundations. Sometimes it's about looking at other income and revenue streams. We talked about that in a previous session, like what are the different options open to you. And then I'm a big advocate for having really good relationships with your funders, because if you keep the relationships good and strong and they really understand the work, they're more likely to fund you again. And I tend to focus on working with arts and cultural organisations or Sussex grassroots organisations here where I'm based. Some of the people that I've worked with over the years, quite a broad spread of really small organisations, quite large organisations, some, not very well known, others household names. And I also come with a trustee hat on. So I'm also a trustee. I know some of you work as volunteers with your organisations. And I'm a trustee of Pelican Parcels, which is our baby bank here in Brighton and Hove. So we're going to look at today a range of different things. We're going to look at the different charity registers. So that's how the funders you might be looking at are registered with the Charity Commission, the same way you are if you're a charity. If you're a CIC, you're not registered there, but I'll just take you through those. I'm going to talk through a whole load of free resources and then some of the paid ones. If you've got resource for a bit of investment, you can, but actually all the paid ones I'm talking about also have free versions as well. I'm going to take you through the Charity Commission website for England and Wales and how you might use that as a free resource and free research tool before just getting you to have a little bit of a look at how you might understand charity accounts. So when you're researching, when you look at the accounts of some of these trusts and foundations, how might you work out whether they are a good prospect for you? And then just a little bit on databases and how to kind of store all the information. But before I crack on, I start all my sessions by talking about mental health. I think it's really important to think about your mental health and whether you're getting the support you need, whether you're taking breaks. For me, I talk about time management here because when my mental health is not good, my time management goes out the window and I seem to spend an awful lot of time getting nothing done. But in trust fundraising, where we're doing this bid writing, we get a lot of no's. And as we've seen post-COVID, cost of living crisis, we're just getting more no's. You're getting more no's for every yes. And that is just hitting people a lot harder. Obviously, you just can't do your best work for your organisation if you're not okay. So actually, it's really important that you're thinking about your mental health when you're doing this research. You're going to have to do some really kind of granular, deep thinking. And if you're not feeling okay, that's going to be really hard and quite overwhelming because there's so many potential places to research out there. You need to be able to be doing your best work. And of course, this comes with a caveat. This has always been important, but it just feels like a very different world post-COVID and during cost of living. So I talk about the stress bucket. Obviously, you come to my last session, you've seen this. The water kind of pouring in your bucket is the things that make you feel overwhelmed. Those holes in your bucket, the holes are positive here, they kind of release that pressure. I just use it as a really simple thing kind of in my brain when I'm feeling overwhelmed to think, am I paying enough attention to the things that relieve the stress? Do I need to just go and walk around the block? Do I need to go and, make a nice cup of tea or have a chat with a friend or something like that just to kind of get me back on track? So we talked about all the different ways you might earn income in one of the previous sessions. But I'm just going to go into a bit more detail about what are trusts and foundations. These are terminologies we use quite a lot in bid writing type fundraising. So a trust is actually a specific legal entity. It has certain, requirements within that. Most trusts are charities, but they're not always. And also, not everything that has the word trust in the title gives out grants. So it's not an automatic sign if it's called blah, blah, blah trust that it gives out grants. A foundation can be a whole range of different things. You might have corporate foundations, you might have foundations that are charities. You might have a trust that's also a foundation. So again, they vary hugely. And grants can be given out by any of these trust foundations. Government gives out grants. Companies, my baby bank recently had money from ASDA, local ASDA branch, as a company foundation. But also sometimes you can get stuff out of them as well, not just grants. We've got a load of bus tickets and Brighton Hove buses. So, you can be applying and writing grant application, and most of the time you are getting funds, but sometimes you can also get stuff. And then there's a whole range around family, corporate, and community. So you might have community foundations, like my local one is Sussex Community Foundation, but there's Surrey, there's Kent, and they operate in really specific ways around kind of bringing different types of philanthropy together. So when I applied to Sussex Community Foundation, what I'm effectively doing is making applications to a whole range of different things at the same time, but the community foundation is filtering that for me as the applicant and for the people who want to give money, whether they're a trust, a charity, or an individual. And we'll look at kind of family and corporate ones a little bit more when we look at one of the main resources. So I mentioned before, it's a really big pot of money. There's about £6.5 billion donated through trusts and foundations. This is obviously pre-COVID figure, but actually the post-COVID numbers are not looking dissimilar. We haven't seen a massive drop. The drop is possibly coming. Wellcome Trust gives out a tenth of that. It is absolutely huge. And the top 10 give out 1.4 billion. The top 300, you can see how it's starting to break down, give out just over half of that money. And I'll talk about the top 300 in a minute. So you've got, approximately, we say, we don't know exactly how many trusts and foundations give out money because it's quite hard to pin that down. But given how many, there are thousands and thousands giving out grants, 300 are giving out half that money. So that is a really good place to start. We'll talk about that in a minute. And of course, National Lottery, they are giving out grants through 12 different delivery partners and mechanisms. So if you're based in England, you might be applying to Arts Council England, Sport England. If you're in Wales, you might be applying through Arts Council Wales, Sports Scotland. So they're all different providers. And National Lottery Community Fund is the kind of overall one that you might be applying to for an Awards for All grant or a bigger reaching communities. And then there is the National Lottery Heritage Fund, which is national as well. So some of them are country-based and some are national, but there are 12 different mechanisms for lottery to give out that money. So I just said there's thousands and thousands of these. Where are we going to find this information? So if they are a registered charity, if they are a charity, as I said, not all of them are, but if they are, they have to be registered with the relevant charity commission. So those of you in England and Wales, if you're a charity, you'll be registered with Charity Commission England and Wales. There's one in Scotland, there's one in Northern Ireland. Some organisations have dual registration. Music Venue Trust, who I work with, have both registration in England and Wales and in Scotland because of the activity that they do. And I'm going to look at the Charity Commission England and Wales in a little bit more detail, because actually of the three, it is the easiest to search, and actually the most are registered there. And even if you're a charity in Scotland, huge numbers, in fact majority of those ones that are registered in England and Wales also will fund organisations in Scotland. It's just about which country they're registered in. So the top 300. The Association of Charitable Foundations, ACF, is the membership body for grant giving trusts and foundations. So if you're a grant giver giving out money, you can join ACF to be part of national conversations, to learn about the best ways to give out money, do your networking, etc., etc. And usefully, they produce this report every year showing a whole load of data and information about the top 300 grant makers. One of the things they really usefully do as well is if you go to the publication page, is they give you a downloadable list. So it's already in Excel of those top 300. And they show you a whole load of kind of other data in different ways. Here they're showing independent charitable makers around sustainability. They're looking at family foundations, where they're connected to a family or a name. Sometimes it's really obvious that it's a family foundation. It's named after a person, Garfield Weston. Sometimes it's not so obvious. The Children Investment Fund Foundation, you wouldn't necessarily know that that's coming through a family. And then it shows you the kind of different corporate ones. And then, this is a screenshot I took out of the 1617 one, but every year they have this list. So this is the top 20. And as I said, Wellcome Trust sits at the top of that list. And some of those in that list there, you will know their household names: Comic Relief, BBC Children in Need. You probably know them, you've probably watched them. Garfield Weston, most people who've worked in trust fundraising probably have heard of them. And there's a few others there that are pretty much household names. There are some that you'll never have heard of, won't be relevant to you at all, because they fund really specific things. They might fund work in other countries, but it's a good place to start. So they rank the top 300, like literally number one by how much they give out and all the way down. It shows you in brackets like where they were last year. Sometimes there's huge jumps up and down because they suddenly give out a huge amount of money, or they gave out a huge amount of money last year, so they were really high up the list, and now they've got dropped back down again. So people do move around the list, load of different factors. And also it shows you here which ones are corporate related. So they're related to some kind of company or business, and the ones that are family trusts. So those are the ones who are founded in somebody's name, etc. And again, it shows you rankings moving up and down. I took this screenshot a few years ago. The top 300 list will be different. As I said, you can go there, you can download the list in Excel. So that's really good first free resource. Charity Excellence Framework had a free COVID funding database, but has now evolved into a much bigger database of information. There's also loads of other stuff on there about evaluation and governance, those kind of things. It's completely free. You can sign up. You'll get regular emails with funding opportunities, etc. You can search in different ways around geography, target group, and those kind of things. And yeah, there's just really good other resources. 360-degree giving is something that funders have kind of come together to do. They want to be really transparent about what they give to, how they give, etc. So there's grant giving data. I think the number's gone up, actually. That's an old 140. I'll double check that. So they give their data to 360-degree giving, and then you can search the list on that website about who the funders are giving to. So you can either use it to say, okay, who are the funders, or you can use it to say, oh, well, I've identified Garfield Weston as a potential funder. What are they funding? How much are they funding? Who are they funding geographically? Are they funding other similar organizations? So it's a really good way of looking at the data in two different ways. And then I always say, go and have a look at your competitors. There might be competitors. It might be a brilliant organization up the road doing amazing work, or in another city, love what they do. Who's funding them? They might fund you, and it might be that they shout about their funders on their website, or it might be that you need to have a look at their accounts to get a bit more of that information, and we'll be talking about accounts in a minute. There are 110. I always feel like I say this wrong. Livery or livery? I'm never quite sure. So there are 110 of these, and there are new ones added all the time, and the oldest ones are really ancient trade associations. So you've probably heard of cloth workers. That's a funder. There is leather sellers. They are literally the old ancient trade associations. So there are loads of them, and the older they are, it tends to be the more money they have. So they have these amazing, beautiful buildings on the Thames in the centre of London that they've had since they founded their, cloth workers library. And they often give out money, and they use their properties as well to support the charities they work with. So it might be that they, you can borrow it, rent it, use it for your events and those kind of things. So they give out money, but they do other things as well. But there are newer ones, modern trade associations and guilds, around international commerce or IT or marketing or whatever. If you've got a really specific project in mind, it might be that there's a library that relates to that. The goldsmiths, or there might be a jewelry or craft type thing you're looking at doing, or something with horses, you can have a look and see what the libraries do. They nearly always fund something to do with whatever it is, cloth workers, for example, and they'll fund some other kind of thing. Some of them are very London focused, so they only fund work in London unless it is their ancient kind of craft guild type thing. Others will fund nationally, and then they pick and choose. And then there is this absolutely fantastic resource. Alicia Granger, who's a freelance fundraiser bid writer like me, put together this 101 ways to grow your prospect list. You can go to a website. I think you just put your email and you download it. And she's gone through all the kind of different free databases, the different resources where you might go to look for funders. So if you've kind of exhausted the stuff above, it's a really good place to start looking. And she kind of segments it. So if you do a project focused on working with disabled people, there might be a few lists to look at specifically around that, or an environmental project, that kind of thing. But it's a really good resource, and a huge amount of what is on that list is free. Facebook's a really good resource for fundraising, I find. There's one called Fundraising Chat, which is really general conversation about fundraising. And then there's a Trust Fundraising Hub, which is about trust fundraising, grants, etc., that we're talking about today. Sometimes people will just say, has anyone heard about what's happening with this trust? And you're like, oh, I haven't heard of them. I'll look them up. Or it might be a place where you go and say, I'm looking for money for this type of project. And people will say, oh, have you looked at them? Have you looked at them? And of course, Facebook groups are searchable. So you might have a search to see if anybody else has talked about funding similar work and see what the recommendations are. But I find it a really good source of information. And sometimes if there's a new big fund opening, people will post something saying, oh, has anyone seen this? This fund's, just open, or asking for advice. There are a few that kind of have a bit that's free and a bit that's paid, that are worth mentioning. Directory of Social Change has a free, it's not a free, it's a paid printed directory, but most of the libraries have it. So, I can go into my local library in the centre of Brighton, and they have all these printed directories from Directory of Social Change. They have the trust one, they have the corporate one, they have the major gifts one, and I can just go and have a look at it in the library, take some photos of the pages where they list the different trusts. I can do the research myself at home when I look at Charity Commission. Again, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But if you wanted the paid digital version, the advantage of that is you can do your searches, and then you can save searches. You might save a search. I might save one for Sussex, for example. And every time a new funder gets added to the online resource that is tagged as Sussex, I'll then get an email notification. So for some people, it is worth paying for that resource. They find it easier to digest it digitally. But if you want to use it for free, go and see if your local library has that for free. The other thing your local library might have for free, while I'm mentioning library, is Grant Finder. Some libraries have that, where you just go in with your library card and you say, I want to look at Grant Finder, and they just log you in, and you can have a search of Grant Finder. Lots of the local authorities will pay for that. NCVO, My Funding Central. It used to be NCVO. It's not anymore. They've kind of moved it over to another organisation. Slightly weird thing. I don't really know why that happened, but it's free for small charities under 30,000 turnover. But once you get past 30,000 turnover, you do need to pay. It's, for example, £50 plus VAT if you're 30 to 50, and then it goes right up to 300 if you're a million turnover. But once you get to over a million, they want you looking at Grant Finder instead, because they'll have cut out all the ones that won't fund organisations over a million, will fund ones at over a million. So yeah, if you're under 30, get signed up. And Grants Online, again, it's not the paid one, but they do have a newsletter, so you can sign up to the newsletter and just receive email notifications about funding lists, etc. What I didn't do is kind of go through all the different local authorities, because each local authority will support in different ways. For example, where I am, in Brighton and Hove, I can go and have a look at the library. I can use Grant Finder. Over the border in East Sussex, they have an external funding team, and I can go and ask the person in that team to do a funding search for me. They'll go and have a look at Grant Finder and all the other kind of different things that they have access to, and they can do me a report. In West Sussex, I think I can go to the library as well, but there's nobody in the council who does that work that can help me. So it really varies local authority to local authority. But if you want to know how they can support, definitely worth talking to your local community voluntary sector support organisation. They'll be able to tell you what the local authority can and can't do. And some of them also have paid subscriptions to things. So you might be able to ask them to kind of do a search for you and then send you the results. So once you've found a funder, you're probably going to head to the Charity Commission website to find out a bit more information. So I use the Charity Commission website in two ways. It is searchable. You can search the register itself, and I'm going to show you a bit about that. And then once you've found a funder, as I said, you can use it to find out some more information about them and see if they really are a good fit for you or not. So when you go to the Charity Commission website, I've put a link in the slides. You're going to get the slides. You can click search, the little magnifying glass. I've got that. That was cool from in there. The little magnifying glass. You can search there. And then when you do that, it shows you there are actually 372,000 charities on there. So obviously we're not looking at all of those. Once you get your search under 10,000, you can export it. I think you need to do more refined searches than that, because the idea of looking at 10,000 is too much. And the reason I've kind of put this one here is you can see lots of them have been removed. The charities don't exist anymore. So you need to make sure you're not looking at removed charities. So that 372,000 also includes a huge number who don't exist anymore. Charities closed, or they've given their money to somebody else because they're closing, or they're working a different way, etc. So if you want to do a more detailed search than that, which you probably do, you want to go to the advanced search, where you can refine your searches. So sometimes it's good to have a look at ones that are newly registered. Some of the organizations I work with, the databases I've talked about only have information as they've kind of found them. Here it is live information. So you might look at charities who've registered in the last couple of years. You might want to, start today and kind of work your way back or whatever. But you can look at more recent charities. If you're a CIC, for example, you might be wanting to look at ones who registered more recently, because they're more likely to fund CICs. But it's really good to also think about the other kind of categories. So you might be looking at ones registered in the last year. You might ignore that about when they're registered altogether, but you're looking at different things, like they've got different classifications. So, if you're doing an art project, if you're doing a project with disabled people, there's different boxes you can tick around that. There's different boxes you can tick where there's kind of overlap, like who the charity helps, so children, older people, but people with disabilities also sits within that category. And it's a lot to do with how you register with Charity Commission. And it's really important that you tick that box that says makes grants to organisations, because there's no point looking at a whole load that don't do that are an umbrella or body or don't give out grants. As you can see here, when you tick that box makes grants to organisations, there's 68,000 there. But again, not all of those still exist or actually do give out grants. Some of them just have the ability to give out grants. They don't actually do it. And you can have a look geographically. So you might just look at your local area, your local region. So here's just an example for Sussex, West Sussex, sorry. So had a quick look at West Sussex. At the point at which I did this screenshot, there were 2,855. So this is enough that I could then export that list and have a look. But already just looking at those four there, I'm like, well, it's not an environmental project, so probably not Sussex Wildlife Trust, not archaeological. Actually, Sussex Archaeological Society isn't giving out grants at the moment. So, you might quite quickly find that, there aren't ones there for you, but you might find that there are. Might be worth going to have a chat to the Rotary Club, etc. So when you export them, it comes out with all these headings. So it gives their kind of charity overview information, contact details, phone, etc. It will show you what their recorded income and expenditure was last year. of course, that's only last year. You know, you might see some really, really go up and down. You know, they might save up and give out a huge amount of money in 1 year, but they might only be giving to one organisation because they want to fund, I don't know, a new, you know, hospital wing or something. So actually you see a huge expenditure in 1 year, but actually the other years they don't give out a huge amount. So the last income and expenditure only tells you what happened in that year. So you do need to have a look at a bit more detail to see whether they are kind of consistently giving. And then those things I mentioned before about who the charity helps, kind of what they do, etc. So let's say you find one, we're going to look at an example in a sec, who look like a good prospect. So not all charities have websites. Many don't. They just have a postal address or an email, and they'd be really happy to receive a letter or an email from you asking for support. And we're going to look at writing letters in the next session. So we'll look at what the layout, what you need to include, that kind of thing. But what I'm saying is, just because it doesn't have a website with an application form in, don't exclude it. There are many trusts out there that they haven't got round to doing a website. You know, there just aren't enough of them on the charity board, whatever it is. They don't want a website. They're just happy to get that letter. So don't take them off your list just because they haven't got a website. We'll talk in much more detail about that next week. They're all required to provide certain information to Charity Commission, which is going to be really useful to you. It's going to be a really good way of going, well, are they relevant, looking at their accounts, etc. If they're a micro charity, if they're under 5,000, or if this year was under 5,000, they won't have to give you accounts. But in the years where it is over 5,000, they do have to produce their accounts. So sometimes you'll see accounts some years and not others. And then I do think it's worth looking at the accounts in detail, even if you think you know them. You know, they do change priorities, they do change what they're doing. Sometimes, you know, the website information will be all about what they're doing at the moment. When you look at the accounts say we're going to be closing in a year's time, or we're going to pause because we're reviewing our strategy. And that is, you know, thinking at board level, but it hasn't quite made it through to whatever they're doing, communicating on the website, blah, blah, blah. So I do look at the accounts of ones I kind of think I know already. So let's just have a look at one as an example. So I choose this one, Violet M. Richards, because it comes up in that West Sussex search that I did, and it's quite often one that people look at in the region I'm based in. So the pages all look like this. The bit on the top right where it says Violet M. Richards. So it has a charity number, whether their reporting is up to date. If it's not, that'll be red. If they're being investigated, there'll be a big red kind of banner there. So if there's a problem with the charity, you'll know straight away. And this is just the overview, like what do they do? You know, what's their income expenditure last year, and their kind of general thing. And then as you click through, having a look at trustees, it will show you. So if you're a charity yourself, you've got this page for you. Go and have a look and see if make sure it's all up to date. You know, it shows that they've got 5 trustees, and their trustees, none of them are called Richards, so we don't know whether they're relatives of Violet M. Richards or not. We might have more information about that in the accounts. And 2 of them are linked to other charities. So you've got 2 here, Dr. Marriott and Charles Hicks, who are both trustees of other charities. So sometimes it might be worth having a look at the trustees, say, oh, they're a trustee of a charity who already funds us, or already know, or I could get to know. So sometimes trusts will say no unsolicited applications, which means don't write to us if we don't ask you to. But you might be able to find a link because you already know somebody, or you already know the organisation that they support. In the financial history, you know, I said some of them really kind of jump up and down. They're pretty stable in terms of kind of what they give out. But, you know, they had 1 year where they gave out a lot less, but the 2 years either side are much higher. And sometimes that relates to what income's coming in, but their income is very, you know, slowly going up. And normally the income relates to, you know, like sets of shares and, you know, investments that they have. And obviously that fluctuates with the market. So you'll see some will have done very well in the last few years and some not so much. And then in the accounts and annual returns tab, you can have a look at all the accounts that they've submitted for the last, I think it's normally the last 5 years there. As I said, if they've dropped too low in terms of what they're doing, there'll just be a year missing and there just won't be a download. So you can click to download and have a look at their accounts. The accounts set out a real kind of standard set of things. There's always something about the objectives and the aims, like what they set out to do, what's the public benefit they're there to do. Sometimes that's really general, and just say general charity. And sometimes I'll say we fund this, this, and this, and they're super, super clear about what they do. And often they'll have a thing about grant making policy. So obviously, if they've got a website, you know that what their kind of grant making is about. But if they don't have it, have a website, it might be here that they say, please send us a letter. We meet once a year. Make sure you get your letter to us by the 1st of June, or, we review bids on a rolling basis. Just send us a letter, whenever you want to. Or it might say, basically, we're closed for now, whatever it is. But it usefully kind of tells you what their thinking was at the time they submit those accounts. It might talk about future plans. It might say, it's our 50th anniversary next year, so we're going to be giving out loads more next year, or we're pausing next year, as I gave the example before. So quite often they kind of lay out what their thinking is, and they not always, but often will list the grants they've given. So they'll list out who they've given money to, how much they've given, and it shows you obviously the 2 years of accounts, but you can look at further accounts and look back and see, if you want to, how long they've been giving to the same organisations for. So with Violet M. Richards, in the Who the Charity Helps, it says relief of the aged, relief of sickness, advancement of medical education to support medical research. Particularly interested in geriatric problems, homes for the sick, facilities for the relief of the elderly and medical. That's a real focus. But the reason it kind of comes up in the West Sussex search is because they're also interested in East Sussex and Crowborough, which is where the founder lives. So there are two main areas. So if you're doing a project with older people in Crowborough, definitely a prospect for you, or an old people with old project with older people somewhere else, probably. And their grant giving kind of overview, what they do is they're saying they prefer to be proactive with the charities their choice. So they're saying they don't want to respond to external applications that come in. External applications are not encouraged. It doesn't say don't do it, but it's saying we're not encouraging you to do that. They don't want you to spend the money. They won't. But then they say only successful applicants are notified. So if you do write to them, don't expect to hear back. But if you do write to them, they might notify you that you've been successful. But they also say, do you remember I said that thing about looking at the trustees? Individual trustees nominate the beneficiaries who they think are in the spirit of the founders. So if you know one of those trustees, or you know one of the organisations the trustees already supports, that's how you might have a conversation about your work, if it fits, to say, could you nominate us? And I mentioned, the grants list. The other reason I find Violet M. Richards quite interesting is because when you just look at 1780, so this is two sets of account, starting on the right, 17, 18, 19, 20. So there's 4 years. They're not funding the same things every year. It's changing, right? So Alzheimer's got research got money 1 year, Thinking Well, East Sussex got money another year. They're active. They're not just giving out. You see some where they literally give to the same list every single year, and they're just doing the same thing they've done every year because that's what they do. And you can see here they're giving out between like 2 and 15,000. I'll talk about the anomaly in a second. On an annual basis, but they are actively looking for different things to fund. And some of them you see just give out the same amount to the same people every single year. And then you've got this really interesting one. It's why I include this Amica Trust to build a house in Malawi. So that got quite a lot of money compared to their other grants, 37,000 in that year. Now they've said they focus on giving to work with elderly people. They focus on East Sussex and Crowborough. And then you've got this house in Malawi thing. So sometimes they just do what they want. So as much as you can do amazing research and you can be a really good fit and all of those things, in the end, if there's somebody within the trustees who are making the decision who sees something that they want to support, they will just do that. So there's often outliers, which It's just as much about that trust being full of human beings who just have their own preferences and make their own choices as it is about anything else. So there's only so much that the accounts can tell you if there's no website with really, really clear guidance. But I do think it's worth having a look. So I'm just going to talk about as my kind of final thing about how you kind of store your research. You're going to be having a look at all these different trusts. It's quite overwhelming. I just think people shouldn't overcomplicate their database. For me, the database is an overview of who is on your radar. It's about tracking and storing information. It's not about trying to capture everything that there is online, because that's online already. That information is there. You don't need all that information about all their preferences. It's just like, are they good fit, aren't they? What I might do actually is share with you the template that I use. Let me just write myself a note. Because I keep it really simple, and I use a kind of scoring system around how much they're given, whether they're a good fit or not, and whether they fit the eligibility areas I'm looking at. Really important to have a date of action. Some of my trust databases have hundreds of funders on there, and if they don't have a date of action, the same ones will get forgotten all the time. And you can use it to support your application process. It might be about stewardship and relationship management, or it might be working out who you need to send evaluation reports to. I tend to keep evaluation kind of separate, but if you're using some kind of relationship management CRM type system for your other work, you might look at it for your trust work as well, and then you can look at evaluation as part of that. I put on there the funders that I have looked at that aren't for me as well, so I kind of have them tagged as never, because what I don't want to do is look at the same funders again and again and again, spend 10 minutes researching them to go, oh yeah, I already discounted them. But if you have them on your list, you can quickly do a search by the charity number or by their name, just to check you haven't looked at them already. So I do put on my database the ones who are never going to fund me, just to save myself time and not researching the same people twice who aren't going to fund me. So I tend to have the kind of web link, charity commission information, just so I can quickly link to their website or the charity commission stuff. As I mentioned, I have a scoring system. I've just said I'm going to send the template where I do grant size. So if they give under 2,000 or under, I give it a 1 out of 5. If they give 50,000 plus, I give it 5 out of 5. And then a fit, like out of 5, how do I fit? They generally fit with what I do. Do they? Don't they? And then I average those. So, if I'm looking at my scoring and you've got loads of trusts who are 5 out of 5 for you, amazing. They give out large amounts of money and they're a really good fit. If there aren't loads of 5 out of 5s, you might start with looking at the ones that are really good fit first, rather than the ones that give out loads of money. People do focus a lot on the money and not so much on the fit, but if they're really good fit, it's better to do those because you're more likely to get a yes than just the big hitters. And then I use a kind of red, amber, green, yes, no, maybe scoring system about whether they match the work around eligibility, which might be about geography, might be the type of activity we do, so art, music, craft, whatever. It might be about the target group that we work with. So for my baby bank, it might be people living in poverty, families, under 5s, school uniform. Those might be my other eligibility area. What do I need to do? What's my action? Do I need to apply? Do I need to phone them? Do I need to check it again in 6 months because they're not open? And as I said it already, I'm going to say again, a date for action, because otherwise you just keep looking at the same ones again and again. I also include a thing about how do I apply to them? So is it a letter, an email, or an application? Network are the ones I mentioned where they say like no unsolicited. So I need to kind of have a look at who do they know that might know people I know. Sometimes it might be about looking on social media. People use LinkedIn a lot. Who's already on the network, or if they already fund somebody or organization, could you ask them for an introduction? But there are funds who are closed, but you're just looking for a connection, possible connection. Sometimes it works, often it doesn't, but it is worth just having a think about that. And then I'll put in where's the application at? Have I drafted it? Have I submitted it? Have I got a yes as a result? If they haven't funded me, if they've said no, they kind of go back in as a prospect, and I might come back to that one later. Might write to them once a year, might apply at the next deadline. Some of them will say, if we say no, you can't apply again for a year. Some will say you can't apply again for 3 years. It varies quite a lot. And sometimes it's worth noting down just to keep that knowledge within an organization, whether they used to fund you before, whether they fund you now. So I'm doing a bit of work at the moment with one organization, unpicking their database. And there's a whole load with kind of notes written on there that are clearly written for the person reading it. And I don't know whether applications went in. I don't know whether they funded work before. I can't decipher the notes. So I try to keep really clear, yes, no type database information. So somebody else can pick it up, somebody else can take it over, and you keep that kind of organizational knowledge in one place. And I would keep it super clear, super simple. I use Excel. I'm going to share that with you. I try to keep it quite regularly updated. And checking the data and the information. So, making sure that they will have a date where I might check them once a year, that kind of thing. And, as I said, it's not just about a simple Excel document, but it's about remembering what it's for. My database is for making decisions. It's about deciding now, next, later, which funders I'm going to apply to in the next 3 months, which are the best fit for the projects I need to fundraise for, or might be ones funding core. All the other information that you found about them is online. That's not going anywhere. You don't need to store all the ins and outs of their preferences and everyone they funded before, blah, blah. I've seen too many lists of it's just scrolling and scrolling through information and not helping me to make decisions. So I just really encourage you not to overcomplicate it. And also it's a bit of advice, I tend to kind of chunk time that I spend on it. I can't do it for a whole day. It's just too much. It will break my brain. So I try to so if I need to do a big bit of prospecting and research, I'll just do an hour a day, or I might do an hour and a half a day. If I need to do a whole day on it during the week, I just don't do it in one go. So I tend to chunks time on it so I can really just focus at that moment. Um, so the thing I love about prospecting is you get to be really nosy. That's what I really like about it. A lot of people find this research challenging, you might find it boring. I find it fascinating. I love finding out about organizations. Sometimes you might read their accounts and find out all kinds of different things about what that organization's been doing, what their plans are. And if there's something that you don't understand, you've looked at the charity commission stuff, you've looked at their accounts, and you still don't know the answer to whatever question you want to know about, how much to ask for, can you write a letter, whatever it is, ask them. Ask the questions of what you're interrogating and what you're looking at, but you can also ask the questions of the funder. Most of the time they have a phone number or an email. Where they don't, you can write to them, but ask them. Better to ask than just disregard them because you don't know the answer to the question. And as always, contact details on the last slide. Keep in touch. You know where I am if you need to ask questions. As always, that was quite a whistle-stop tour of things, but the great thing about having the session recorded and the slides and the template I'm going to send you is that you can come back to it